Welcome. It is Wednesday, February 21st, and we are talking about the Mideast and the history and the perspectives of the Mideast. Before we start today, people have asked me for different books, and these are all nonfiction. I sent it to Carol. I put it in the chat. I'm happy to send it to all of you. But this one is by Daniel Sokach. Can we talk about Israel? It's I think he independently published it and it's hard to get a hold of. This one is very easy to get a hold of. Noah Tishby's book, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on the Earth. This leans a little bit right. Full transparency, I hope Rabbi doesn't watch these. I told him that I wanted to teach from this book. He goes, I don't like that book. I said, I know, but this class should have both sides of the story. Next week, we will not have class, and I will remind you and keep repeating it, but I am taking conflict of interest, and the book that I'm reading, Arabs and Israelis, Conflict and Peacemaking in the Middle East, is by an Israeli, a Palestinian, and an Arab, Egyptian,
Wow,
I think.
that should be
Right, it's very, very, very dense. And we're meeting with senior educators next week at the ICE Center, so that should be absolutely fascinating. We will go March 6th and March 13th. I will email this to everyone so that you can hear it. I'm just going to put this in the chat again.
One quick question about
Yeah.
that book.
Which one?
The last one. Did
Yeah.
the Egyptians say why they didn't take people in 40?
I don't know. Listen, and the Arab countries didn't take in people from 48 on. 67, there wasn't really that much displacement in 73. And in Jordan, for instance, the Palestinians were in refugee camps, and they, it stayed that cemented their refugee status. So, I had my home this weekend. They're much more left. And as I'm sure I started last week, I have a romantic relationship with Israel. I remember Israel. My personal kids only remember since Netanyahu has been the prime minister. And I said, this is not black and white. If it was black and white, or there was an easy answer, this would have been answered many, many years ago. But it's very complex. It's very troublesome. Again, the news this week that Netanyahu wants to go into Rafah. The thing is that I'm sure Hamas is, near the hospital, near all a mosque, whatever it is, because that's their MO. And, but more thousands of innocent Palestinians are going to be killed. So it's very, very hard to watch. I know that there's been some talk of negotiations, to get the hostages out. And I could tell you this, I'm leaving March 15th to go to Israel. It's on a mission. It's called a mifgash with a meaning. Mifgash means to meet people. And I'm sure it's going to be, they call in Gaza, that area, envelope, Gaza. So I'm going to be there, and I think it'll be, hey, Sarah, I think it'll be a very meaningful trip. I know that I have a lot of colleagues going to Israel. A lot of people are taking missions. AUF has people going, and
URK is going the end of February, beginning of March.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't going to be a tourist trip. I have been and I live there, so I don't need to go to Masada. And what? So someone on my social media feed, it's amazing that, Israel is conducting a war and everything is, kind of normal, in Israel. So we'll start the study part of today.
What is it? I'm sorry, but what does normal mean?
Normal
I have
means,
not heard it.
well, normal means that public transportation is running, people are shopping, people are in restaurants, the sirens are not going off.
Okay. All right.
I mean,
Because people, there's still a big fear factor,
Mhm,
okay, which I think is not normal.
mhm.
And I know, I've talked to many people at UOJ who would have gone on a tuition and won't. Okay, now that's a diaspora situation.
Because they're afraid to go?
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to go. I did think about when I'm packing and I have to ask the trip providers, like, if I have to go to Miklacha, if I have to go to the bomb shelter, like, should I bring a robe? You know, that's the only thing, buy my phone.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I'm more concerned about, not being
You're gonna be
pressed.
inappropriate in the fight.
Thank you.
So Vanessa, so
Yeah.
not still coming in from Ghana,
Um,
you know?
I don't know, and I don't have the red alert on my phone. But I know just anecdotally, my good friend, her daughter, is in Tel Aviv, and I don't think that people are going to the bomb shelters. And again, my social media is usually a harbinger of, kind of what's happening there. And, listen, if, the IDF goes into Rafah, all bets are off. When I bought
That's
my,
gonna happen the next week or so. So
What?
You'll know before you go on your trip.
I know,
I hope you have
and,
a good
uh,
insurance.
well, funny you should mention that. So I opted for the fully redeemable trip in case something happens.
Yeah.
It was like $200. And I got health insurance, which I've never done, like a travel insurance. I never do that. I'm being fairly conservative about that. And I think that, when you go to Israel at any time, your tour provider is hooked into the security. So if it's somewhere not safe, they're not gonna take. Susan, go ahead.
Well, as you know, Vanessa, I was listening to a webinar the hour before this, and it was from the the Center for Israel Education from Emory University, and it's moderated by Professor Ken Stein. And at any rate, today he had on numerous clergy from other groups living in Israel, non-Jews. He had Druze, he had a Greek Orthodox, he had all different people. They all said that they would much rather live under Israel than the Palestinians. They felt that life living under Israel would be something that they could tolerate much better than anything else.
Listen,
I thought you'd find that interesting.
he's not gonna pick someone who says, I hate living here. But
People who got out of the room that under Governor Abbott.
Yeah, I think that, I've seen so many Palestinian, there's been so many demonstrations here about Palestine and, free from the river to the sea. And I don't think that people exactly know what river they're talking about or what sea they're talking about. But the one that just flummoxes me is the queer Palestinians who are like, free Palestine. And to be queer in Palestine, that's just not gonna, you can't. And you would be, I don't even know what would happen to you. So some of that stuff, the intersectionality of since Palestine is they're thought of as being the underdog, and so that, you know, LGBTQ and Black Lives Matter align themselves there. And, you know, our kids who are pro-Israel have really been, you know, left out in the cold, and, you know, it's very difficult for them, very, very difficult for them. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And it'll be, so again, my personal kids are to the left. I told them I'm going to Israel. They said, oh, and
Oh, no.
well, no. So my son-in-law, who's really the most left, said, well, what is the trip? Are you going to hear different narratives? And it is different narrative. And I'm sure we're going to hear from different aspects of the conflict. And again, and I said to them, it's not black and white. And, you know, yes, I am open to all of that. Of course, I am much more sympathetic when you hear the stories of these people who went through October 7th. It's absolutely horrendous. And the thought that, you know, there's still hostages in those tunnels who haven't seen the light of day in 4 months is really more than I can do. But now we should, and if you have any other questions, let me know. And we will start with the Declaration of Independence. So I do want to show. One and eight. No, oh, here we go. So, there's the Declaration of Independence. This is the signing of it. It's in a building in Tel Aviv, and if you go on any, if you go on a tour with any synagogue, you're gonna go right there. They are redoing it. But I think to go in the past, before it was redone, to see the chairs where they all sat, is just absolutely fascinating. There's Ben Gurion, there's not a lot of rabbis there. And I think Rabbi has shared with you that they didn't want to say any blessings, they didn't want to use God's name. So the only name they used was Sur, which means rock. So it could also mean the rocks of Israel, or, you know, God as a rock. And they don't have a constitution. They don't have a constitution. So on November 29th, 1947, the United Nations approved Resolution 181, calling for the division of the Mandate Palestine into two entities. The leadership, and they called it the Yishuv, which that's the term to describe the Jewish community of Palestine. It comes from the Hebrew shevet, you know, to sit. So it was like the settlement, the Yishuv of Palestine, decided to declare the establishment of the Jewish state on May 14th, 1948. So now we have a cluster of new holidays in May. Yom HaAtzmaut, which is, you know, the Independence Day. Right before it is Yom HaZikaron, which is their Memorial Day. And in Israel, Memorial Day is, it's much more somber because everyone knows somebody who has died. And this year, I think, is just going to be heartbreaking to see everything. And then, like a week before that is Yom HaShoah.
Why did they have to do a declaration of independence if the United Nations, well, maintained an independence? Well, why was this significant? They just wanted to have a ceremony, or what
Right.
are they doing?
So I think that's a really good question. And I think that, you know, I think that they wanted to declare it. They never did a constitution. And so this gives them some of the Eretz Israel, it gives them some of the, it solidifies everything that people, you know, it talks about the Balfour Declaration. It talks about the survivors of the Nazi Holocaust. And it talks about on November 29th that there was a, the mandate. So it says, accordingly, we, members of the People's Council, representatives of the Jewish community of Eretz Yisrael and of the Zionist movement, are here assembled on the day of the termination of the British mandate over Eretz Yisrael, and by virtue of our national and historic right, and on the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael to be known as the State of Israel. So the State of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. Now, of course, in later years, there was the whole "who is a Jew?"
Yeah.
And going back to last week's discussion of that the Knesset is 120, it's a coalition government, and that these really religious fringe parties, that's Vanessa speaking. I don't know what Rabbi would say about that. So they sometimes dictate what happens in the theocracy, and that is something that I think the reform movement has been very vocal about, because they, want Reform Jews to be counted as Jews. Yeah.
If they don't have a constitution, how do they form a Knesset and all that? There needs to be something that says Knesset has to have so many members.
Right.
There's gotta be something.
Right. I'm gonna have to, I don't know. Yes. I think because it's too,
For years, I've said
They
they couldn't agree.
I think they barely agreed on this. Can you imagine if we had to write a constitution in 1948 for the United States of America? I mean, we're moderns, and, not that they didn't, in 1776, not that they didn't have terrible arguments over slavery and that type of thing, but I think it just couldn't be done. Couldn't be done. And
Vanessa, don't you think that the Declaration of Independence was a little bit based on the US, that the US had a Declaration of Independence?
Yeah.
And then a constitution, and it's an aspirational document
yes,
that establishes,
right,
certain aspirational things.
yes,
I think that's right. I think,
Absolutely.
it definitely, if you think, is even independence the right word? I mean, they're declaring their formal existence.
right.
Which is a little bit different, but I think using the Declaration of Independence verbiage is to model after the United States.
Absolutely, because in Hebrew it's called Megillat Atzmaut. And a Megillah is a scroll.
Ah,
So that's, that's what they call it. So I think,
I'm very surprised that they don't have a constitution, because they claim to be a democracy
yeah,
and they have no governance.
well, they have case law, right, that they depend on
yes,
from
they have a Supreme
1948.
Court.
I still don't know how they were able to form a Knesset. They don't have anything that.
Yeah, there's no governance document.
I have a
Right.
question about that too,
Yeah.
because, I mean, they were British mandate, so maybe they
Yeah.
were going from the British system where there's, the prime minister is really the powerful head who is based on the representation in the parliament, but they only have one house of parliament. They only have one house of the Knesset.
Yeah.
I wonder how they did, decided on that.
Yeah. The Knesset, the Israeli House of Representatives, is the legislative authority and the sole governmental body with the power of legislation. It also has a constitute role in the creation of a constitution for the state of Israel. The Knesset also supervises the work of the government, the executive branch, and carries out several quasi-judicial roles. As an electorate body, the Knesset elects the president of the state and the state comptroller. Now, there is a president. And the first president was Chaim Weizmann, also a scientist, but Ben-Gurion, I don't know what you say. He wanted all the power, and he made sure that the president was a figurehead only. The Knesset has 120 members and is located in Jerusalem. Members of the Knesset are not elected directly by voters. You vote for the party. It depends how many votes you get, and then, the top 5 people get in, the top 6 people.
Wow, so they do not vote for individuals.
Neither does Britain.
And even when Netanyahu becomes prime minister again, as head of Likud and the coalition, people have not voted specifically for Netanyahu.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're gonna do that in New York, you just vote for the party and the party picks the person.
It's a strange thing.
Yeah,
But
I
you're
mean,
voting for delegates.
yeah,
Okay, so we vote who wants us for
yes.
specific delegates. Okay.
Well, we don't vote in their elections. We vote in the Zionist Congress. And the Zionist Congress, and that comes up every 5 years, they run some of the Sachnut, the Jewish agency. And depending on who's the head of the Jewish agency, it comes from that election. And if you have a right-wing guy, it's usually a guy, in that position, it's not good for secular Jews, Reform Jews, none of that. Because, the religious party is,
They're just as bad as the fundamentalists with the Muslims and
yes,
it's the same way.
I agree. I agree. I mean, it's this Schmotrich and Ben Gvir, they're terrible. They're racist. And it'll be, but and this is where you can draw a parallel, I believe, to the United States, is that you see that the right wing here thinks that Trump is going to be good for them and conservative, fiscally, blah blah blah, even though he's not. And I think the same thing happens in Israel, that there's a right wing and this Sephardi and Mizrahi, they all vote in that clump. And I don't think it benefits them, but they can't see through, they can't see the forest through the trees. I work with a lot of Israelis up at camp, and we had a discussion one night because when we were at camp, it was the protest for this judicial reform, and we had this woman who has been there for years. She runs the stable. She's Israeli. I didn't realize she was Mizrahi. And she said, I grew up in a home where my dad said, Rock Bibi. That means only Bibi Netanyahu. She said, I realize now, after hearing different viewpoints, that maybe he's not the best person for the state. I don't know if her father realized that, but she is a very, Neil said, I believe that the British do not have a constitution either. Okay. Again, I'll have to look that up. But to see this very intellectually smart, lovely woman say, she would only say Rock Bibi. And, when we get up to camp, we have our kids who are on campuses and left facing. And this year, I'm sure it'll be even worse because of the war. And then we have these Israelis who have just fought in the army, or going to the army, and it's a mixture that's not always easy to have conversation with, and we don't know if the Israelis can come. Some of the they called up all their reserves, their miluim, and some of them have just gotten back home, and their school semesters were all pushed back. I don't know what's going to happen this summer. If we usually have, I don't know, 50 Israelis at Azrui, and there's hundreds over the United States and France, and they're shlichim, these ambassadors go over the world. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens, and the discussion with the Americans and the Israelis. Yes.
I had heard that the Hands of Peace organization closed down.
Yes.
Oh,
I didn't realize that until Wendy Rhodes, our member Wendy Rhodes, said something. And we have a current member whose daughter ran it, Emily Kenward, and I haven't talked to her, but yes, and I don't know anything more than that.
what is that?
Hands of Peace was an organization that needed a lot of funding because it brought together Israelis, Palestinians, and Americans here in America And they would stay, and have a program for about 10 days, 2 weeks. And they'd have speakers and they would have dialogue. They came here and, we would talk about Reform Judaism.
We
They-
had the 10th meeting with them, that was so interesting to
Yes.
Shabbat with them.
Yes.
Yeah, they spoke to us. Right.
Mhm.
Well, I guess it's such conflict now, they couldn't get anybody.
Or maybe, listen, that is,
It's probably dangerous for people to engage in that at this point.
I don't know. I'll have to get in an email to Emily. She'll know more, but, it's also heavily funded. And I think that, maybe people don't want to give money to that
We
right now.
talked about, what was it, last week or the week before, where we talked about funding
Yes.
and where it went.
Mhm.
Which I
Right.
think is perhaps an issue.
Yes.
I don't know if you know of Leo Beck.
Yes, of course.
Their managing director is coming to speak at BJBE
Oh.
on March 21st.
Okay.
Now, this is an Israeli organization that builds community of Arabs and Jews. They have programs that bring everybody together.
Yes.
I'm going to be very interested to find out how their funding is going,
Yeah.
okay? They get a lot of money from Women in Reform Judaism, that's why they're coming in and doing this program.
Yeah.
But, it's that he's gonna talk about their organization and their challenges in today's environment in Israel.
That should be very
It
fascinating.
should be.
When are they coming?
March 21st,
Oh.
it's at BJBE.
Evening or during the day?
Evening, so it starts at 7.
It's a Thursday.
Yeah.
And so I will be sending an email out to
Right.
the women that will come, but I think everyone's invited to this.
Right. Vanessa will be in Israel, but Rabbi will be home and, I don't know if they've opened it up to the community yet.
I'll find out.
Find out. Is there another question? Under the leadership of David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister, he's the one who, took the handles for the declaration. And he read the declaration of the establishment of the state, to all those assembled. For me, I think it's interesting, there was 2 women. So guess who one was? One's easy.
Golden Mayer.
Golda Meir, one that we can all guess. And the other one is Rachel Cohn, who we've never heard of.
Really?
She just slipped into obscurity. But, that they had 2 women there, I don't know. I don't know how.
Well, the socialist Zionists were more.
Right.
They
There was
get out there.
37 signers. The oldest was 82, the youngest not yet 30. 3 signers went on to become prime ministers of Israel. So that's Golda. You have to go back, I don't know who else is there. 14 became cabinet ministers. They've all since died. The last one I think died in 2003. But when you think about it, we've all were alive when these people were still alive is, I don't know, it's kind of,
It's scary.
it's mind blowing for me. Like, it's been 200 years since, maybe 100 since the signers of the Declaration of Independence. The declaration is made up of 4 parts. 1 discusses the history of the Jewish people, its struggle to renew its national life and its land. The 2nd proclaims independence. The 3rd names the principles of freedom, justice, peace, equality of social and political rights, which are to guide the new state. And the last section calls upon the Arabs of Eretz Israel to preserve peace, extends an offer of peace and good neighborliness to all neighboring states and their peoples, and appeals to the Jewish people throughout the diaspora to rally round the Jews of Eretz Israel. And Ben-Gurion, we talked a little bit about Zionism last week. Ben-Gurion he said to be a Zionist, you have to move to Israel. And, that was, even in the sixties or seventies, was, quite a statement. And, I think most Americans would disagree with that, even though they are, very supportive of the state of it.
I heard a quote by somebody that was so interesting in defense of the diaspora, saying, if you have something very precious, you don't put it all in one place.
Well, that's very interesting. What a good quote.
Yeah.
What a good quote.
So the diaspora, and in Hebrew it's galut, has a negative, meaning, I think.
In Israel, though.
in Israel.
And even here, when we use that term, we know that the people using it are probably Israeli, and they're using it kind of against.
Right. So I went to a training for the shlichim, these counselors that come in the summer. And this was all done in Hebrew, and I understood most of it, but somebody was translating. And this woman got up there, and I've never forgotten this. She said to them, what's your Hebrew teacher's name? And they go, Bracha, Tzipora. And she said, what did they tell you about galut? That it's bad, you don't want that. Then she said, well, where do you go on vacation? And the term they use is chutz la'aretz, out of the land, out of Israel. That's where you go on vacation. That's where you buy things. That's where you have a good time. So even in Israel, there's a dichotomy between galut and chutz la'aretz. And, the kids are, thinking about this, when they come here, they're ambassadors, and they could be 18 to 22, 23 tops. That's a big responsibility. And they go through many screenings. We get a lot of, kids who can speak English very well because they have a parent. You can always tell, like, oh, is your mom, you one parent speak English at home? Yeah, I do.
But can you let Hubert in? He can't get on, Vanessa.
Sorry. Yes, here we go. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, I think it's a great responsibility for these young people. I mean, I'm not exactly sure how, our 18 to 22-year-olds would comport themselves. Well, we know how they comport themselves because they go on Birthright Israel, and it's like a booze cruise, and they don't always behave. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't want them to be, ambassadors of America. So
when they come to
yes.
camp, excuse me, when they come to camp, are they as counselors, or what do they do at camp?
They're counselors. And again, for my personal experience, I sent my kids to day school. I sent them to Israel. I sent them to camp. And the thing they point to as their transformational relationship with Israel is their relationship with their Israeli counselors. That, it's foundational for them. And it makes a big difference. And that's one reason why we do it. Susan.
Yeah, Vanessa, if I could, for those of us listening on Zoom, it's when you're not the one speaking, it's very difficult to hear what other people are saying. You can hear them, but you can't make out their words.
So that was an answer to, what do the shlichim, what do these kids do when they come to camp? They're counselors, and they're in the bunks. And in the past, it's not easy to find a specialist, a Jewish specialist who's a sailor or a water skier. And so we use the Israelis in some of those specialty areas because, and of course, at Asruri, we speak Hebrew, and so we need them in the Hebrew speaking parts of camp as well. Yes.
What camp are we talking about?
Right. So the camp I'm talking about is Olin Saying Ruby Union Institute. It's the Reform Movement's camp. There's 6 or 7 of them. All the Reform Movement has 6 or 7 camps all over the United States, and they're in different geographical areas. They also now have 6-point sports and art and science. So,
I think the main camp that people are aware of, which I am, is Camp Vermont.
that's
That's
for the conservative movement, Camp Vermont for the conservative movement, yes. And then they bring shlichim as well. So most of these camps all bring Israelis, and I think, and that is the Jewish agency. They, send them here and we pay them, and, I think it's a great collaboration. Any other questions? Back to the declaration. So, if we look back to 47, 48, that's a long time they knew that when they declared it, when the British, left in May of 48, that things were not gonna go well. In 47, the Palestinians they don't call it the War of Independence, they call it Nakba. And again, my children went to a Middle Eastern restaurant, and my daughter had to go to the bathroom, and what was the code? 1947.
Oh, wow.
Because they were obviously Arabs, and that date had meaning, which Lital didn't pick up on, but my son-in-law goes, did you see what the code was? Oh, 1947. So, I think that, again, and we're looking at this from different perspectives, that, obviously, it has different meaning for the Palestinians. And when we read different historical accounts, some Arabs fled because their religious leaders told them to flee and that they'd be able to come back. Some were forced out by Israelis, and it's not an easy it's a hard time period to go back and look at, and to see what's being taught in the schools. And I'm sure that the Arab schools have a different education system, and how they teach this and how we teach this. And look, the ultra religious may not teach it at all, because the ultra religious don't believe there should be a state of Israel until the Messiah comes. Some of them, have come. Some of them are a little bit more amendable to that now, but during 48, some of these religious guys, were helping the Arabs and giving them arms, and
Oh, wow.
yeah.
So Nakba means catastrophe, I
Yes.
think. And,
Yes.
yeah, I was reading about that the imams were telling people, leave, you can come back in a few days.
Right.
Some people felt betrayed, that they thought they would be able to come back. And
Right. So
so
Sarah
that's
said,
like now why people are so paranoid about being displaced in Gaza for one reason.
right. So Sarah just said that, people felt betrayed when the imam or the mukhtar said, you can come back. And that's why that makes what's happening in Gaza even more,
Being displaced again.
being displaced, right, that they're not gonna be able to come back. And listen, I think there's some right-wing Israelis that would like to level Gaza. And, there's, there's, I don't know how many million, but it's very densely packed. And, I think we'll have to see what happens in the next couple weeks, and you'll be meeting with Rabbi, so he can take that up on March 6th. Again, we're not meeting next week. We're off February 28th. And then March 6th and 13th, we'll be back. So, also after, so we have the Declaration of Independence. It's been signed, and Ben Gurion, made a stance. He lived in the Negev. He wanted to populate the Negev, which is near Gaza. But in the 50s, it was a time of austerity. There wasn't a lot of there wasn't a lot of anything. And, there wasn't a lot of food, there wasn't a lot of, phones. Until the cell phone, to get a landline in Israel used to take years, years and years and years. And I think, we remember a time before cell phones, but we all had phones in our house.
Yeah.
And, to live without a phone it's really very austere.
In 1971, I was in Israel my first time for 9 weeks and stayed with an Israeli family. And they were thrilled that they got their first phone.
Right.
And it had taken years of being on a list to be able to get a phone in their home.
Right.
It was a huge deal.
Janet was in Israel in 1971, and her host family just got a phone. How long have they been living at the place they were at?
I think probably over 5 years.
Over 5 years. And now with cell phones, everyone has a cell phone there, and it also becomes it's a priority, because like little kids have cell phones, because if there's a bombing, if there's you have to get, you have to know where your kids are, and one visit there, I went to a play in Hebrew. And it must have been easy Hebrew, and we were there with the middle school. So just think about, and listen, I wouldn't want to go to a play with a middle school from the United States, never mind Israel. And these kids were, so misbehaved. We were talking about it afterwards. They're given a lot of freedom through middle school. And then when they go to the Army, it's a universal crackdown. And, I think for the most part, because everyone goes to the Army, it creates some unity and loyalty. And we were discussing last week, my mother wanted to know, what about the religious people, and what happens when they don't go to the Army, because they do not go to the Army. But when you're in Israel, you take a test before you go into the Army, and it's called your profile. And it's physical, mental, they give you all these tests. If you have a high profile, you can have your choice of what unit you want to go to. So the pilots, that's the highest profile, vision. I mean, they have to have everything. And then the yeshiva students say they're going to yeshiva, and they have to enroll in that yeshiva. Now, there's also, you can sign up for a year of service, Shnat Shirut. And so, but then you go into the Army, and some of the Orthodox women do this year of service, and at least it's benefiting the country. For me, these religious boys, they're being paid by the government not to go to the Army and not to work, and it's the prevailing feeling is that after the next election, which can only, cannot come soon enough for me, that there's going to be a crackdown, that they're going to have to go to the Army, because they're leeches on society, because we're paying them, and they don't give back to society. Yeah.
I think when that system first came about, right after the Holocaust and the establishment of State Israel, the people that were learning were sort of thought as the treasure keepers of the knowledge. And I think they were maybe protected initially, partly because of that, and because of the power of the religious right in the coalition.
Yeah, Sarah just said that the, religious people were the treasure keepers. I don't know that I agree with that, because I think they had this coalition thing, and I think some of the labor Zionists, Ben Gurion, they thought that they were weak, a drag on society, but they needed them as part of the coalition.
And they were secular. the other.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yes. Even now, the greater percentage of Israelis are secular. The Hebrew word is chiluni. Now, just because they're secular, when they go to their secular schools, they learn Bible as literature.
Oh, wow.
So you can, they'll talk to you about Bible and you're like, wow, how do you know that? Or you say, what do you do Friday night? Well, I'm secular. I say Kiddush, Motzi, but I don't think everyone in our congregation does that or could do that. And my other anecdotal is at camp, when we're up there, we'll say, okay, who's doing Kiddush? You're in your unit. And the Americans say to the Israelis, hey, you know Hebrew. Come on, do it. And the Israelis go, I don't know that. Do it.
Oh, really?
And then the rabbi and the educator says, I'll do it. So,
But not necessarily the prayer.
exactly. And, oh, this is my other favorite story. My son went to go visit cousins in Israel, and I am so proud. He speaks Hebrew. He's conversational, but he did the whole Kiddush in Hebrew. Cousins are like, oh, wow. He knows the whole Kiddush.
Oh.
And to me, that was funny. That's what impressed them. So, we have to find some common ground to talk and to be able to tell your story. And I think that after I come back from Israel, I'm going to have good stories to tell. And after this summer, one thing we really talk about is telling your story, because you can't disagree. When I say that I'm going to Israel, I was in Israel and I saw X, Y, and Z, you can't say, no, you didn't. Yes, that's what I saw. And I think that those type of discussions are more fruitful than, getting into politics. But obviously, which doesn't mean you need to get into the education and so on and so forth. I know a couple of you were at last week with Rabbi Moffat, and he started talking about, he's, I think, going to talk about the declaration this week too. I'll tell him that I did a little bit here. But he was talking about these right-wing settlers and how they changed the face of politics in Israel. And the one thing that he didn't mention, which I think was a big part of that, is the rise of Meir Kahane and the JDL, the Jewish Defense League. And they were right-wing crazies. They were very militant, and they had summer camps, and all the Zionist camps, and I went to a Zionist camp. You used to do things together, and the shoot off of theirs was Beitar, and they wanted to bring their guns. And we're like, no guns. And listen, we have people now. Look, if you had told me 4 years ago that you'd have 24/7 security at the building whenever you were here, I would have said, oh, that's not happening. But that's happening now. And there are some, and now our security person has a gun. And has had a gun since Tree of Life, which was 4 or 5 years ago. So, and there's some very militant, societies that, want to come to your synagogue and, with a gun. That's been in the past, let's say 4 or 5 years. But this Meir Kahane, let me just find him. He
Tasty.
he's he was a member of the Knesset. He was born Martin David Kahane in 1932. He died in 1990. He was an American-born, Israeli-ordained Orthodox rabbi, ultra-nationalist. And I think, again, that was the start of nationalism having a negative connotation. And I think now, when you say nationalistic, you know, we think of, you know, white nationalism, and that is not a positive, it's not a positive, term. Thank you. And he co-founded the Jewish Defense League, a new political party in Israel. He,
Sorry, Vanessa, is JDL in Israel and US?
well, I think in Israel it was Kach, it was a political party,
oh.
and I think the JDL was here. And he was just, you know, while serving in the Knesset in the mid-1980s, Kahana proposed numerous laws, none of which passed, to emphasize Judaism in public schools, reduce Israel's bureaucracy, forbid sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews. I mean, and he was assassinated in a New York City hotel by an Egyptian-born US citizen in November 1990. His legacy continues to influence militant and far-right political groups active today in Israel. I mean, he was just a polarizing figure and not, and he had great influence.
Does
And
JDL still exist in the United States?
I don't,
I mean, I've heard of them, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen them.
I think that there's,
Well, there's the Anti-Defamation League.
no,
different.
that's
That's
different.
different.
The ADL, yeah,
That's different.
totally different.
In fact, I can remember when we did some programs and we were inviting in someone from the ADL and people were like thinking it was JDL and how disgusting it was to have them come. We
Yeah.
said, no, different organization.
Yes. Although I just Googled it and ADL comes right into it. It's a far-right political organization in the United States and Canada, formed by Mayor Kahana in 1968. I'll have to look into it, you know. The group adopted the slogan "Never Again," which was originally used by a Jewish resistance fighter in the Warsaw Ghetto.
It was formed after the 6-Day War.
Yeah. And then you had a lot of Aliyah. And you got all of the West Bank.
Yeah.
So,
Well, is that when they got Gaza also?
And the Sinai.
yes.
They had, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the most
Yeah.
territory.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a question about.
Yeah.
So they had this disengagement policy that Netanyahu was also involved in, where they withdrew from Gaza.
Mhm.
And even though that sounds like kind of a beneficial thing for the Palestinians, I was reading that that was a strategic move by Netanyahu to stall the two-state solution in a way.
Listen, I think anything that Netanyahu does is only in his best interest. He's prolonging this war so he won't be indicted. And that does not surprise me. And when it was not a popular decision, I want to say it was in like 2004. And I think I was there in 2003, and one side were orange and one side were another color, and people were very, there's mixed feelings. And it was a beautiful community in Gaza, which they, you know, they left. And
And
then,
they were gonna reimburse the settlers or give them.
oh, I'm
houses or
sure,
something.
oh, they reimbursed the settlers. I'm not worried about the settlers. Taka. So,
Well, the other interesting thing was that, I read that the Palestinians were about 700,000 in 1948. Now they're 2.2 million. So the birth rate has been a lot.
you know, the birth rate of Arabs, religious Jews is astronomical. And religious Jews here in the United States.
Oh, and the other reason for the disengagement was to keep a majority of Jews in Israel. They were worried about losing
Yes.
the majority of Jews.
Yes, and the same with the West Bank, absolutely. So, well, we'll have Rabbi take this up, in 2 weeks. I'll send you emails to remind you. And, if there's anything else you need from me, Thursday night is Rabbi Moffick's class. My book group is tonight. Any questions, let me know. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, there's also, are you aware of, there's a program, that is going to be, this is a different one than the one I mentioned, at BJBE on March 3rd?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now this one, they're pulling all the choirs together, and we're singing, and it's combining with the African American community.
March 3rd at BJBE with the African American
Yeah.
community. I will look for, I need,
We
that
should let people know about it.
yeah. That sounds like a Cantor J question.
Well, I know he told us it's happening.
Okay.
But we have to publicize
Okay.
it. and
Janet said it's at BJBE. But I will look into that. And I know he's also doing something, with choirs and on a cool, which is, an organization in Israel, but watch your Macomb at Home. That's now just coming out on Thursday. So that has all the links and information you need to know. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.